Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore, or rather welcome back, because this is really a continuation of the previous episode. So we are now in episode 44 of season 1, and this is part 9 of my series on the Hoysalas. After 2 years of relentless battles and expansion, Vishnuvardhana, easily the most significant contributor to the Hoysala fortunes, was sitting on a kingdom that he had turned from a little principality into an empire. Having driven the Choras out, the prized Gangavadi was entirely his. The other prize that he craved was not his, and that is independence from the Kalyani or Kalyana Chalukyas. Despite his recent successes, he was still their vassal, and he wanted to change that. And in this episode, let's follow his dream. But first, give me pause to thank the Prestige Group for their support, which makes this podcast possible. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Right, we are in the early 12th century. It's the year 1118 AD. From the time that Vishnuvardhana got himself into conquest mode, he was not one to sit down and count his winnings. All about strategy, he was setting out, cutting his teeth by mopping up smaller principalities and adding to the core strength of the Hoysala kingdom. After the disastrous attempt that he had made with his brother, then King Ballala II, to try and gain independence from the Chalukyas, Vishnuvardhana decided not to take them on yet, even though he despised them. Instead, he followed his great-grandfather Nrupakama's strategy and tested his strength against less formidable enemies first. The only major battle that his forces had engaged in was against the Chora-appointed local ruler in Talakadu, by which he started to consolidate his dominion over Gangavadi. In the last episode, I went over the last 2 years where he had achieved all that. Now, there was also a talk about his campaign into Kanchi, but the possibility of that being an invasion, much less a successful one, is unlikely, so I'm not going to recap that. Those 2 years until 1118 AD saw more battles, more high-pressure, unrelenting military activity. But in the middle of all of these military campaigns, there was an occasion when we were able to see the softer side of Vishnuvardhana, the romantic side of his, and that related to his marriage to Queen Shantala Devi. In Belur, there's a frieze, or a stela as they call it, a panel with the sculpture at any rate. Since I can't show photos here, let me explain this art to you. At the center of the middle panel is a king seated in darbar on a cushioned throne. His hair is tied in a knot above his head, and he wears a jewel diadem. Large earrings resting on his shoulders, he has a trimmed beard, and his moustache twirled in an audacious manner. He is adorned with garlands, a sacred thread, armlets, bracelets, a waistband, and short secured with a girdle. In his right hand he holds a sword, and in his left hand betel leaves. This portrait, called Vishnuvardhana in Darbar, captures a sense of life and dignity. Now, very importantly on this very sculpture, to Vishnuvardhana's left, on a similar seat but lower down, sits his consort. Her name was Shantala Devi. She sits in a relaxed posture. Her hair is styled in a somewhat odd and curious butterfly-shaped knot, and she is adorned with earrings, necklaces, garlands, armlets, bracelets, anklets, and waist belts. She wears something like shorts, and she has a shawl that is wrapped around her knees. Her upper body is bare. In her left hand, she holds betel leaves, and her right is raised to place one in her mouth. It is a fascinating sculpture with a level of detail that is astonishing. But the fact in the sculpture is that Shantala Devi is seen as a recognizable figure, and that indicates that she was no ordinary queen. It would seem that she had a special hold on Vishnuvardhana from all the historical accounts that we hear. It was she, even though she remained a committed Jain to her dying days, that encouraged her husband to follow the Guru Ramanuja, and that led Vishnuvardhana to abandon Jainism and become a Vaishnava. But Shantala Devi clearly knew what works for him, and she pointed him in the direction of his dream. Sometime on or before 1120 AD, Shantala was crowned queen. The inscription in Belur described her as an expert in singing, instrumental music and dancing, a rampart of the Jaina faith, delighting in the gifts of food, shelter, medicine and learning. But it also transpires that her relationship with the other queens of the court was not cordial. She was, the inscription says, a rutting elephant to ill-mannered co-wives. The importance of Shantala Devi is underscored by the unusual number of mentions she attracted on inscriptions, and indeed her death, which occurred on Shaka 1050, Somvara Chaitra Suddha Panchami, which approximates to Monday, March 27th, 1128 AD. The inscription says that she ended her life, likely through the Jain ritual of Salekana or Samadhi, at Shivaganga. Stricken by her death, her parents followed suit, saying that once the queen is gone, there was no reason for them to be alive, and both of them ended their lives. I have been unable to find out why a queen so celebrated would end her life. Naturally, legends are like creepers to gaps in history, and one version, a favorite of local tour guides at the Chennakeshava temple, has it that after many years of marriage, Shantala could not conceive a male heir for the kingdom, and despite her entreaties, Vishnuvardhana refused to replace her as the main queen and elevate her best friend, the other queen Lakshmi, who had become pregnant by Vishnuvardhana. Unable to find peace, deeply troubled by her situation, Shantala is believed to have ended her life by jumping off a steep cliff at Shivaganga, which is a hill about 50 kilometers due northwest of Bangalore, at a spot locally known ghoulishly as Shantala's Drop. But the story clearly comes more from folklore than any epigraphical record, and besides, even her childlessness has been debated. For example, by some historians, Ballala was Vishnuvardhana's son by Shantala. But Shantala's story has fascinated raconteurs as it is a tale of love. As legends go, the daughter of a general, she would not have been the first choice of queen for Vishnuvardhana, but one day he saw her dancing. He fell instantly in love with her and married her. He also married her best friend Lakshmi, as the girls were inseparable. Legend says that the sculptors who watched her dance at the temple's consecration were so enamored of her that they sculpted the mini Madanikas of the Channakeshava temple in tribute. It is the story of rags to riches. From humble beginnings, Shantala rose in power and position to become a rock for Vishnuvardhana. She was officially crowned as queen and had a conflicted relationship with all the other ladies and officials of the court. The time came when she could no longer live with herself and decided to end it all. Her death marked that tragic end to this romance, which has become the subject of dance dramas, epic fiction, and of course, plenty of oral legend. Now, as far as Shantala's Drop and her jumping off a cliff, it is very, very unlikely, because as a committed Jain, the only way that she could have taken her life was by due process of Salekana. Many of the stories that survive about Shantala are the work of K.V. Iyer, whose classic fiction Shantala is supposed to be an emotional and evocative story written in Kannada. Interestingly, it is said that Iyer started out as a cook and then became a bodybuilder who started his own gym and trained thousands of men. And then, following a meeting with the famous T.P. Kailasam, he took to literature and crafted this classic. Romance done, we return to war. After this commercial break, I will look at the rest of Vishnuvardhana's military campaigns as he continues on his relentless military spree and a battle against the overlords, the Kalyani Chalukyas, and how that ended, if it did at all, right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RERA approved.
Hi, I'm back. Closer to 1118 AD, Vishnuvardhana had been in and out of his new camp at Talakadu and was continuously juggling between his military campaigns and attending to the business of consolidating his winnings, especially Gangavadi. By this, we must understand that even though Vishnu had taken over Gangavadi entirely, There are typically smaller feudatories or outlying provinces that tend to act defiantly, and these need to be sorted out by some means of either persuasion or outright subjugation. It must be noted that some of these smaller provinces may not have fully been convinced of switching over from the Choras to the new kids on the block, the Hoysalas. Defiance did not always mean challenging the Hoysala dominion itself militarily, but they might have held out on some administrative matters like revenue or tax, for example. Maybe they were behind on their dues. It needs to be remembered that the Choras had set up a solid system of administration and local autonomy, self-governance that had been welcomed by the population. Now, to set things in place, Vishnuvardhana needed help. So he appointed his loyal and adoring brother Udayaditya, remember him, to administer the holdings. And for this, he set up a subordinate capital at Kolar. Now, we know about all these things because there are accounts that describe the death of Udayaditya's daughter in the village of Betamangala, which is right by Kolar goldfields. Now, it is interesting to note that Udayaditya's approach was to not disrupt anything. He didn't want to disrupt the existing government system set up by the Choras. Instead, he focused on collecting revenue from former Chora districts with as little disturbance to the existing methods as possible. And this cooperative method probably won over more hearts and minds than an attempt to override the current methods with new ideas or worse, by force. Ruling the areas around Kolar was also fairly straightforward because really nothing much changed. There was some slow and steady movement from the west into this area, but until intensive tank building and land improvements began, which was much later, in the 13th century, there would have been very few people wanting to trade the lush fields of the western districts for this relatively dry, barren plains around modern Bangalore and Kolar. Now, with family assistance firmly in place, Vishnuvardhana and his horse returned to the battlefields. As I have kept mentioning, the relationship between Vishnuvardhana and the Western Chalukyas was a strained one. The Chalukya overlord was Vikramaditya VI, and he was uncomfortable with Vishnuvardhana and was justifiably suspicious of his motives. Vikramaditya put this to the test. In early 1118, he organized an attack on Hoysala territory, but he did this by proxy. He assembled a dozen governors and vassals and formed an army by them. Now, this army, also called the 12 Shamantas, brought together a fairly diverse group of regional leaders, and among them, there must have been representatives of the Kadambas of Goa, the cousin Kadambas from Hangal, the Pandyas of Uchangi, the ERRATA of Sonvati, and the Choras of Henjeru. They're just a few of the key figures. So they got together and they were asked to attack the Hoysala territory. Gangaraja, the famous general who had taken Talakadu, rose to the challenge. The decisive moment of the battle came at Kannegal, a location which is most likely situated in the northern reaches of the Hoysala kingdom. Now, Gangaraja switched over to new tactics. First, he caused the battle to happen at night. And then when the battle started, Gangaraja got his men to dismount from their horses and elephants and gave hand-to-hand combat. Now, this tactical move was great for the Hoysala army. Being hill people, they found this terrain to their advantage. The timing, coupled with the advantage of this hilly terrain, worked heavily in favor of the Hoysalas. The Chalukya-sponsored imperial army was totally caught off guard. Unprepared for such a confrontation, they were routed. Not only did Hoysalas win the battle and scatter the Mandaleshwaras and the Samantas, but they returned home with considerable booty. By March 1118, Vishnuvardhana, feeling at the height of his power, launched a counterattack. Now this is important, as this should be counted as his first offensive against his Chalukya overlords. Vishnuvardhana's forces were stronger, and they were more motivated than ever, especially considering that they had been blooded almost constantly since the Battle of Talakadu. These men were eager for another campaign, especially because this time around their spears were aimed at their principal enemy, the Chalukyas. The campaign swept through the Kadamba territories. It stretched beyond the Tungabhadra. Several small towns and small principalities fell to the Hoysalas. Vishnuvardhana pushed forward, sweeping through the northernmost parts of the kingdom, which extended then right up to the present-day Bellary. All that was in 1118. Then suddenly, the next we hear of anything was 1120 AD. There's little to no knowledge about what transpired in these 2 years, but in 1120, there was another battle in Hallur of some significance when a Chalukya general Bopanna was defeated. At the defeat of this man, at this point, the Sindha chief, Achugi, whom we might remember from the failed attempt for independence by Ballala and Vishnuvardhana, attacked the Hoysala forces and not only defeated them, but pursued them deep into Hoysala territory. And at the end of so many years, it was by 1122 that we know that Vishnuvardhana was able to re-establish some form of stability, but on the downside, it also meant that he had for now to quieten down and submit to the overlordship of Vikramaditya VI, and therefore his next attempt to secure his independence had failed. But ironically, in the course of battle, Vishnuvardhana had demonstrated such valor that Vikramaditya VI was so deeply impressed he remarked, "Know that of all kings, Hoysala alone is unconquerable." And these were among the last and most prophetic words of Vikramaditya VI. He died in 1127 AD. A few months after Vikramaditya died, Vishnuvardhana resumed his campaign of war. At first, he chose to attack the Kadambas of Hangal. Now, there was a strategic reason for this. The last days of Vikramaditya were not great. They were anything but happy, and the empire was fraying at the edges. The proof of this is that the lack of records from 1128 and 1129, soon after his death, in Banavasi, Hangal and other nearby regions, suggests that there was turmoil, and this would likely have been caused by clashes between rival petty dynasties. From Vishnuvardhana's perspective, this was not an opportunity to be missed. So his focus shifted to territories beyond the Tungabhadra, where his ambitions could take full flight. The entire decade between 1130 and 1140 saw Vishnuvardhana locked in conflict after conflict around that region. There is little point in my going over the last details of these campaigns, as they pretty much are a rerun of the same things, with successes and reversals and insert tales of intrigue and alliances, with defeated kings and being driven back south into Talakadu. And Vishnuvardhana kept up this crazy display of might right until he died around 1142. Now, I choose to ignore the debate about the year he died because all of that is little more than academic interest. Now, despite Vishnuvardhana's best efforts and decades of relentless battle, he did not really manage the one thing that he had dreamed of and worked towards, to secure independence. But his relentless pursuit of it, with attacks on the Chalukyas, did weaken them to the degree that his worthy successor, Ballala II, was able in later years to wipe them out and have the Hoysalas take over as principal rulers of the Deccan. And that happened reasonably quickly in 1193 AD. And so ended the rule of Vishnuvardhana, a man who was a devotee of Vaishnava, a devoted brother, a devoted ruler, and a devoted husband, so locked in love with his wife to the exclusion of all counsel, and a relentless warrior who saw victory in every battle, even the ones that he had lost. Coming up on the next episode, the years after Vishnuvardhana, the fall of the Chalukyas as we move into the reign of Ballala II, and deal with the emergence of a new force in the Deccan, the Turks and the Arabs. History is getting so much hotter and pacier, and I cannot wait to bring you the next episode. And all that is coming up very soon. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.